In this lesson, we're going to discuss congruent polygons. And with congruent polygons, all the angles are congruent. Okay, the matching angles are congruent, and also the sides are congruent. Okay, so for instance, if we had triangle ABC congruent to triangle XYZ, okay, uh, everything matches. Angle A matches angle X, angle B matches angle Y, and so on and so forth. Okay. Next concept we're going to discuss is something called the third angle theorem. Okay, and it states if two angles of one triangle are congruent with two angles of another triangle, then the third angles are congruent. So for instance, if we had two triangles and these two angles are congruent and the second set are congruent, okay, so if these two are congruent to those two, then automatically these third ones are congruent because triangles add up to 180. So that's mathematically that's the only that's how we prove that. Okay. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to list congruent corresponding parts with congruent shapes. So here we have triangle TJD congruent to triangle RCF. All right, we're going to list the matching sides, the sides that are congruent. Okay, now I can do this two ways. I can look at the diagram over here, or I can read the name because each point is in order. So if I look at the first side, TJ, TJ would be congruent with the first two letters of the second triangle, RC. Okay, so TJ is congruent to RC. All right, let's do the next set. It'd be JD. JD is congruent to CF. All right, JD congruent to CF. And last, it would be TD. TD congruent to RF. So we can tick mark those. All right, those are the sides. Let's talk about the angles. All right, first we have angle T. Angle T would be congruent to angle R, because they're in order. All right, so angle T is congruent to angle R. Next we have angle J congruent. J would be congruent to angle C. All right, so I'll mark those congruent. And finally, angle D would be congruent to angle F. All right, angle D congruent to angle F. So that's just getting us used to identifying corresponding parts. Okay, next we're going to decide whether the triangles are congruent. We're going to justify our answer. Okay. So in this first example here, we have two triangles that they look about the same, but we have to do two things. Number one, we have to prove that the angles are all congruent to each other, and secondly, we have to prove that the sides are all congruent to each other. Let's start with the angles. Okay, here we have angle A congruent to angle E. Angle B and angle D are both 90, so they're equal. Okay, and these two angles are going to be congruent because they are vertical angles. And we all know that vertical angles are congruent from past lessons. Okay, so the angles check off. All right. Next, we're going to look at the sides. Okay, these two are tick marks, so those are congruent. We have both of these sides over here. Those are both 3, so they're the same. And same thing with these two 4s right here. Those are the same. So the sides all check off. So in this case, triangle ABC will be congruent with triangle. Now I'm going to go in the same order. It will be triangle EDC. EDC. Okay? Let's take a look at this next one. We're going to do the same process. We're going to check the angles first. So J is congruent to M. Okay, K is congruent to N. That's good. And then we have vertical angles again. Okay, those are vertical. Vertical angles are congruent. Okay, so the angles check off. And the sides don't really work because these two sides are from the same triangle. Those are congruent. And then over here, same thing. These are from the same triangle. So this would be no because the sides aren't congruent. All right. Okay, finally we're going to do a proof. Okay, we're going to prove that these two triangles are congruent. We're going to write a step and justify each reason. So first thing I'm going to do here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a two-column chart. Statements are on the left and reasons are on the right. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my first step as what's given to me. Okay. So if I look at the diagram, I can see a bunch of markings. I'll start with side PQ. PQ is congruent to side PS. Those are congruent. QR is congruent to SR. Those are tick marked. All right. Those are the sides that are given. Let's do the angles. We have angle Q congruent to angle S. Those are marked. And finally, we have these two angles right up here. We're going to name those with three letters. It would be angle QPR. Angle QPR is congruent to angle SPR. SPR. All right. Now, step 2. Let's see if I can get the rest of these angles and sides congruent. First, I'm going to go to the side. Now, these two triangles, they share that middle side here, so I can mark that congruent to itself. PR congruent to PR. And anytime something's congruent to itself, that is the reflexive property. Reflexive property. All right. So it looks like I have all three sides equal to all three sides. So those are good. The sides check off. And we have to figure out these two angles down here. I can mark those congruent because of what we learned earlier in this lesson. Okay, I could say angle QRP is congruent to angle SRP. And that's that third angle theorem. Two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the third angles are congruent. So all the sides match, all the angles match. So I can say that triangle QPR is now congruent to triangle, to triangle PSR. And that is because of the definition of congruent polygons. And that concludes the lesson on congruent polygons.